Hey trauma healers, in today's Valentine's Day video, what we're going to talk about is avoiding relationships that can trigger your trauma. Before we get into today's video, the reason that I shoot these videos for you guys is to help you overcome, heal, and release your trauma so you can go from a life of suffering and coping to a life of thriving. So let's get into today's video. Relationships. Why can relationships trigger trauma? Well, there's several reasons for that. One of the reasons is we tend to date. We tend to have partners and date significant others who emulate the attributes of the parent who we had the most conflicted relationship with. So that's for one. And by the way, I want to give credit where credit is due. I follow Nicole Perea. It's her Instagram handle, I believe, is the.holistic.psychologist. Highly recommend that you follow her. She has great advice about overcoming trauma, relationship issues, and things of that nature. So that's where I learned about some of these themes. I've also done some of my own research and reading and had some painful experiences in life, shall we say. So yeah, that's one thing. That's why, oftentimes people will be like, oh my God, this person's acting just like my mom used to, or just like my dad used to. It's because subconsciously, that's what's familiar to us, are people who act like our parents did. And again, like I said, it tends to be the most conflicted relationship that you had with a parent. So that's number one. Number two, what you should know about is attachment styles. There's three main styles, and sometimes they can be in combination. One is avoidant. Avoidant attachment types are people who, anytime they get close to somebody, they start to feel trapped, and they start to feel like they're going to lose their freedom, even if they're not. They get scared, and it's usually because they were enmeshed by a parent or authority figure growing up. But the problem is, things could be going great, you get close, and then all of a sudden they pull away, and you can't understand why. Oftentimes you blame yourself, and it's not really anything that you're doing. It's the fact that they are scared of intimacy, and if they get close, again, they fear losing their freedom, they pull away. The second attachment type is secure. That's the ideal attachment type. That's a person who can pretty much date anybody. They're secure, they love themselves. Relationships add to their lives, but they're fine with or without them. And they don't seek their happiness in another person. They are secure within themselves. The third attachment type is anxious attachment type. Oftentimes, traumatized people have this attachment type, either anxious or avoidant, but most typically anxious. And anxious attachment type people, those are people who are afraid of being abandoned. They're afraid of messing up the relationship. They can feel insecure in the relationship. And oftentimes, again, it's back to childhood. It's because, they had an absent parent. They could have been neglected, or they could have been abandoned. And that could cause an anxious attachment type. So, as you've heard in some of my other videos, I had abandonment issues from childhood because I was part of this weird social experiment where I was taken away from my parents at a year old. I grew up in a kibbutz in Israel, and my earliest memory is running around in the middle of the night, just terrified, trying to get home. And apparently that was a big problem. I used to run away a lot from these like little children's dormitories. So it's funny, in adulthood, I would sometimes date people who were avoidant, and they would pull away for no reason, and I would really, really trigger anxiety, abandonment issues. I didn't realize it till I did a lot of work on myself. So, the advice for everybody who's overcoming trauma issues, the last person that you should date is somebody with an avoidant attachment style. So, when you're first dating somebody, don't ignore red flags. Oftentimes they'll tell you, they'll give you indications that that's their attachment type. They'll say things like, they'll talk about past relationships, that they felt that people were too overbearing on them. And if you hear that, look, sometimes people can be overbearing, they can be jealous, but you need to ask additional questions. Okay, what did they do? Now, if it's somebody who's calling 20 times a day or who's always getting jealous, then that's justified. But if they're telling you something like, oh, well, it just seems like when I get close to somebody, I get kind of scared, I get kind of freaked out, that's telling you that they're an avoidant attachment type. You can be friends with that person, not a good idea to date them. So just be cognizant. And, you could possibly date somebody who has an anxious attachment style as well. But even that's not ideal because you could just trigger each other's anxiety in various ways, just doing minor things. And you got to understand, one of the reasons to do the trauma healing work is so you can go from being an anxious attachment type to being a secure attachment type. That doesn't mean you'll never have any anxiety, but in general, because you support yourself, because you have a great relationship with yourself, because you love yourself, what happens in dating situations will not trigger your anxiety. But, it takes work. You got to heal and release your trauma. And that's what I'm trying to guide you to do. So it's a brief video about attachment styles. If you want to know more, read a book called Attached. And also, I believe there's another book called Surviving Love Addiction. Highly recommend those books. Until next time, happy Valentine's Day. Love you all. Remember, the most important relationship you have is with yourself. Love yourself, and then you'll get more love in your life as well.